Okay, hello everyone. It is our fourth session about news and media literacy. I am Jonathan Warner. I'm one of, I think I said last time four, but I am one and there are four other MLTI 2.0 ambassadors. My normal school year work is at Cape Elizabeth Middle School, where I'm a tech integrator and I run the makerspace. And this is
Hi, I'm Kate Meyer. I'm one of the 5 MLTI ambassadors. And when I am not an MLTI ambassador, I'm an English teacher and a design thinking teacher at Mount Desert Island High School in Bar Harbor.
So, depending on how you count, this is either chapter 7 of 8 or chapter 4A of 4 on news and media literacy that Kate and I have been working with in the last several weeks, drawn from the Common Sense Education curriculum around news and media literacy, and both feeling like this comes up so much in classrooms, whether it's social studies, ELA, hopefully coming up quite a bit in science classes, that these 4 issues that we've been working with are really critical to having substantive in-class curriculum related conversations about, in that many of them get relegated to librarians or just are not happening. And yet to do that is to do a real disservice to our students who don't necessarily have the tools to be comfortable navigating some of these questions of news and media literacy. And I think one of the areas where Kate and I keep coming back is that students have this label of digital native, but digital native, however you feel about that term, is definitely not digital citizen or digitally skilled or knowledgeable. And over again, we see students really struggle with, I'm thinking of like the rubber hitting the road when they actually have to deal with some of the issues. So these sessions are divided in 2. For today's, I'm working with some of the resources for teachers that they may reference, places to look for getting up to speed on this issue. And today's focus is responding to hoaxes and fakes. And then in your tomorrow, which is our later this afternoon, we will switch gears and Kate will take you through Common Sense Education's focus lesson on this issue, as well as some digital resources to support your teaching in that area. So I asked the same question last week's session, but want to reiterate that one big part of the equation that we need to address when we're talking about hoaxes and fakes is the nature of the subject matter. Meaning, is the mention of the subject, is the topic something that is automatically inflammatory and going to create division in your classroom or create some kind of partisanship that clouds additional assessment. So one of the recommendations we'll make for you is to pick some pretty outrageous non-political things so that as you're talking, you can have this substantive conversation about the nature of the material without it being clouded by some of the other politicized questions. So for example, asking yourself, how politicized is this topic? Is the vocabulary, or is the author or speaker? For example, though for many people this is not a political issue, climate change can be very highly politicized. Does the term fake news by itself trigger someone's sensibility of defensiveness, or that that's a politicized term? And or is the speaker or author someone who is identified on one end or the other? The example that came to mind because the headline across my screen as I was writing this was Sean Hannity, where saying that name carries weight and carries a politicization that we're sort of widely aware of. So that initial question for me, as it was last week, remains pretty critical. So what I thought I might do this week is refer you to the places I look. So for those of you that haven't had me say this before, I worked for several years as a library and instructional technology specialist. And we had combined our tech integration and librarian roles. And the work really got me digging into these questions of digital literacy, media literacy, how to deal with new media. And as a result, I got to really delve into some of those materials, and in that process met or worked with some really phenomenal people that I wanted to connect you with. Kate and I are teaching a class in AOS 91, or I guess we just finished teaching a class in AOS 91 where she works. And one of the things we did is refer people to our own PLNs, our own professional learning networks. And the folks that I wanted to introduce you to today, I think really are so spot on in these conversations. And they'll give you great resources, some frameworks for thinking, and some really kind of thoughtful lenses to use. So in this first one, Jennifer Lagarde, who is one of the most hilarious people I have ever heard speak or met, and she's just fantastically entertaining as a presenter, but also crazy smart, and uses this hashtag fact versus fiction, which I'll talk more about in just a second. But that's a great place to look. And her, if you want to follow her, her handle is Jennifer Lagarde, Lagarde. And in the recording of this, you'll see in the comments that all these slides that we're showing you are available. She has co-authored a book with Darren Hudgens, which I'll show you in just a moment. He uses frequently the hashtag media literacy, and just provides great, in his tweets, provides great sort of jumping off places for conversation. So for example, in March, there was this case of a firefighter who in the background of the image of the battles in Ukraine had Edmonton on the back of his jacket. And everyone thought that was an indication that the picture was faked. Well, it turned out that for totally other reasons, the man in Ukraine did actually have an Edmonton jacket, but he just raises these kind of snapshots of possible conversation subjects and our topics. And that media literacy hashtag can be really helpful. So the two of them have co-authored two books, Fact versus Fiction, Teaching Critical Thinking Skills in the Age of Fake News, and Developing Digital Detectives. And those two books have given rise to a hashtag Digital Detective Squad, and the expansion of Jennifer's website, librarygirl.net. And those are terrific places to start. You can purchase them as books. They also have wonderful resources on their websites. And hers in particular kind of is a launching off place, jumping off place for many of those. And as a part of the book, they've also begun a monthly newsletter, which is called From the Mixed Up Files of Dr. Ken Bort. And it is a really wonderful digest of how you might approach some of these media literacy, fake news, reliability questions with students. And she really does, the two of them do a beautiful job of distilling sort of the most recent thinking about this, these really interesting examples into one place. And it's, you just subscribe, and it's not a website that you visit, you just get a monthly linked, live linked newsletter, and is for me a terrific resource, and one that I hope you'll take advantage of as well. The second, well, I guess the third person is Susan Bearden. And just as an aside for a moment, if you ever get a chance to meet members of your PLN, there's a really interesting range of things that happen. But I had this opportunity to go to the US Department of Education for a meeting when I was working with the National Librarians Group through ISTE. And Susan and I had been going back and forth, and we'd met on Zoom and like all these different conversations, but we never met. And we were in the lobby of the Department of Education. And as I was turning sideways, I saw this woman rushing me. And I was like, what the heck is happening? And she gave me this huge hug. It's like, Jonathan, it's so nice to meet you. And it was a really interesting moment of like my digital and my personal life colliding, and having the sense of like, oh, I'm like known to this person in a really meaningful way. And yet I've literally never met her in person before. So I just commend to you the bizarre / fantastic world of meeting your PLN. But she does a wonderful job of pulling from a bunch of different resources. So she's not content creating, but she curates really wonderfully. She frequently uses the DigCit hashtag, and has also written a terrific small book called Digital Citizenship, a community-based approach. And as Kate and I have been talking about, she emphasizes that this cannot be an isolated series of conversations, whether it's about media literacy per se or digital citizenship overall, that the more broadly those conversations are happening, the more likely it is our students are going to internalize them and understand them to be normative. So her book really approaches that beautifully. And it's part of a series of really slim, they're all between like 120, 140 page books published by ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, which is the parent group of Actum, our main based group. And they have pulled together these wonderful sort of brief snapshots, and the whole series, I think, is a terrific resource to reference for you. And she's at @S_Bearden if you want to follow her on Twitter. So one of those resources she curated and introduced me to was John Meehan. And John has a website called Adrenaline Rush, www.adrenalinerush.com. And he does, as you may see here, a bunch of really fascinating and cool things. But this one made me laugh out loud, which is he taught a lesson around fake news and sort of critical thinking as a consumer of the media by creating templates that looked realistic and then filling them out with increasingly absurd things and trying to get his kids involved and engaged in a conversation about what this looks like. So for example, this unbelievable headline, right? No big surprise that Kate wins in a landslide. However, the one that he got them finally to realize was White House to be painted shocking purple overnight. And the kids were like, really? Wait a minute, Mr. Meehan. And they then were able to sort of figure out where he was going with this. But what this links you to, if you click on the image, is I think it's 5 or 6 Google Slides. That one, there's this one, and several others. And they're templates, and you just fill them out and then display them for students. And he gives you a series of really great sort of thought questions to raise with them. But what cues or what clues do you have that this might be a fake or might be real? There's another one that's called Talking Heads. And there's the two sort of very serious looking men that are like engaged in conversation, and you could put whatever headline you want underneath. And it really just works nicely to engage students in that conversation. And one of the things he does is so this slide, he has this with the exact same information that he's filled out, but he switches over to this. And so that nothing changes except the image in the background. The kids are like, that's weird. Why did that happen? And beginning with those kinds of little cues about what might be indicating that something is not reliable, I thought was a really terrific, simple approach. And I love that he gives us those resources to work from. If you're not familiar with the Bible of American school librarians, may I introduce you to the School Library Journal. And as one of my friends says, it's not just for librarians anymore. It really has such great resources, especially as we try to share the responsibility for teaching these lessons. Really wonderful, easily accessible resources. So in this example, 10 resources to teach students media literacy. Karen Bilton, who's a commentator frequently for them, has literally listed for you things to try out, places to take a look. And I observe in this first line of what she wrote, millennials and Gen Z kids have come of age in a digital world. And no, Kate, I didn't choose this article just because it said those magic words. Kate is a big generational studies person. Now more than ever, our way of life, including the way we conduct business and how we build and sustain interpersonal relationships, is conducted online. She goes on to explain why that has benefits, but then the dissemination of fake news, misinformation, and propaganda is a pressing issue. And so the SLJ has, in a really smart way, I think, taken on the role of responding to an increasing series of conversations about the need for media literacy, and recognizing that what's happening, no matter sort of the politics of where a particular part of the country is, or a particular school, that there's some universalities that, if I go back to what I said at first, if you separate the substance of the conversation or the topic of the conversation from the question of reliability, you may get to some better, more meaningful conversations. And at least, assuming our goal here is to develop the student skills, getting them closer to thinking critically and further away from their maybe gut knee-jerk emotional response. So recommending books here as resources, and each of these held by many school libraries. So just take a look in your own school library and see if one or more of these show up. But then each of these authors is also a terrific resource if you just search those individuals to get a sense of what they're offering. So these first four are focused on elementary and younger middle, and the individuals writing there can each be really helpful if you're looking for particular people as resources. And then they also have a list of additional resources for middle and high school. And then two more at the bottom that I didn't include, which are specifically for librarians. But this approach of taking on the responsibility is something that is all through SLJ now, the School Library Journal. So not just this article, but the sort of concept has come up over and over again now. And if you just search it in the bar across the top, whatever you're looking for, fake news, media literacy, you'll see really wonderful collected essays and sort of resource lists and thought-provoking perspectives on how we might handle this as educators. Another approach I think that has been really successful in a lot of schools is to pick something that is really relevant to the students and real world, but a little distanced from, I'll say, American politics. So as you'll see in these next couple examples, the reality, I think, is that we can better have the conversation if it's a little more at a distance. And if we have it metacognitively, so in this instance, saying to the students, like, what is your personal experience being, I don't know if this is quite the right word, it's a little overkill, but like victimized or assaulted by fake news. And this example where TikTok was becoming a really powerful misinformation, disinformation engine, raised lots of questions for people looking at the situation that then we can kind of carry over to conversations with our students. What did you see about Ukraine? What did you hear that you thought was true? And then what else have you gotten as news from TikTok that you then later learned was fake? So that kind of approach where you're both finding a topic that works, but also getting students thinking about how they learned about that topic can be quite effective. And then this, which is from a terrific website called EdSurge, the article goes on to provide some really great additional examples like the one I just gave of Ukraine, as well as some suggestions about how, in a broader context, schools might take this on. So not just you in your classroom, but how your district or your building can initiate and develop a campaign that might address some of these, might sort of encourage multiple teachers, multiple disciplines to be having the conversations. So I put that one here because as you work your way through the article, it's both the actual subject matters you might discuss and how you as a school can respond. Circling back around to Jennifer Lagarde and Darren Hudgens again, they also write, as do many others, for ISTE. And under the heading of teaching fact versus fiction when seeing is no longer believing, the article provides a bunch of deceptive visuals, as well as links to places where you can either make those or sort of connect with them. And the sensibility that they have used is that this very much belongs in the digital citizenship context, but also in the responsibilities of someone teaching with technology. So as you read, you'll see that these two, I think, as I said, have a great perspective, but ISTE has done a wonderful job of pulling in a lot of other voices on the subject matter. And as you sort of work your way through some of those articles, again, using the search across the top for fake news or media literacy, you'll find a pretty wide ranging series of perspectives, but all taking on a real responsibility for doing this work. Another reason I pulled this one up is because it raises the infamous Pacific Northwest tree octopus. And though I did not screenshot it, I wondered, Kate, if you would just tell us a little bit about that website, since I know it's a favorite of yours.
It is, and I talked about it, I think last week. So in week 3, I think you'll see me talking about that website because it's so much fun. It's an older website that exists about the Pacific tree octopus, and it's a lovely article about the habitat of the tree octopus and how the tree octopus, interacts with the world around it. And it's of course fake, but teachers use it all the time to introduce the idea of credible websites to their students. So popping that up, like, gosh, have you guys heard of the tree octopus, and kind of launching into that discussion. And then really starting to pull apart that website and looking for the visual clues as to whether or not the tree octopus website is a credible source, is a reliable source. So I do love the tree octopus website for that.
Have you also mentioned sort of if you have it in you, the acting skills of this can be really hilarious. And I'm imagining, for example, if Kate and I were co-teaching this, being like, Miss Meyer, my understanding is that the tree octopus is endangered. Is that true? Let's take a look, right, and dig in. And it really is well done. And sort of the more you get into it, the more both you can find the clues and you realize how smartly the website is designed to both deceive and cue you that it is deceiving. So as I said, I didn't put in screenshots because we talked about it last week, but if it's not one you've seen, you could just Google all the facts about Pacific Northwest tree octopus and really find some great examples that illustrate this point and do what I said about distinguishing it from the subject matter. I mean, who wouldn't save the tree octopus, right? It is an American crisis. Another possibility, as I mentioned, around Ukraine is to raise really relevant, sort of personally known subject matter with your students. And if you hadn't heard about Momo is a really bizarro, but totally hoax, I guess, story, whatever, viral news event in which people were told that their children were being encouraged to commit suicide by this character. And it raised all kinds of great questions, well, horrible, but once people figured it out, raised great questions about whose responsibility this was. Thousands of people retweeted the warnings about it, and parents were, panicking, and it unintentionally offered this great opportunity to examine why that had happened and what was going on. And again, going with that question of what other things like Momo have you heard about? What other spoofs or myths have been generated and then perpetuated. We talked last week about how those kinds of things can go viral. But if we then shift the focus to, so how do we know, right? I'm amazed that kids still don't know about Snopes, which has been around now for a decade plus. Snopes.com, which does effectively debunking online myth, and it really does a wonderful job of just like deflating those balloons. Like, this is absolutely not true, and in a very sort of no holds bar way. If you're going to use it in a classroom, I'd recommend that you just check, don't go to Snopes live in the classroom before you find the subject matter. As Kate not so long, having seen some of the content that I saw, you can pretty quickly venture into something that, not because the website's inappropriate, but the subject matter in telling you the story of where it came from, or kind of how you might make a decision about whether or not it's reliable information, can get a little colorful, I'll say. So just preview what Snopes is going to say, but it's a wonderful thing to just put up on the board and use as a resource to talk to students. I also, just like a side note, this is from The Guardian. I'm a big fan of the British press, I'll say. And The Guardian, for every single article that is more than 3 years old, puts that warning up on top. This article is more than 3 years old, which to me is just such a brilliant, simple, like, remember to check your sources. This could be completely wrong now, right? Someone may have become a Momo copier and Momo is real now, right? So just that basic human dignity. Thank you. Leave it to the British to label their own news as potentially fake. But it just seems profoundly decent on their part. Also just a great reminder to show students, like, look at how they're approaching this. They're approaching it as, please be aware that there is potentially a time-limited relevance of what we've shared with you, and we want you to look more into it. And actually, if you click on that little icon, it will explain what I just said in very British terms. We're just putting this here to let you know why questioning this article, thinking more about it, could be important. Two more to look at. This one, really, I thought, fascinating about how AI is creating reliable faces. So every person you see in those images is not a person. They were digitally created, and they are manipulated to be representative of the reliable qualities of real people's faces. And again, the subject matter being neutral and sort of fascinating in the sense that, like, this is possible, maybe getting to great conversations or raising great questions about deep fakes and how things can be replicated in a way that's almost unbelievable at this point. Those conversations really start to, even if you're just raising the question without a great answer, like, what the heck do you do when you find that someone that you've been relying on as a source was totally manufactured, right? But we know that spam bots and at rapid rates, tech are creating AI is creating accounts and sort of responsive individuals who make it look like someone has thousands of followers, or look like they are somehow getting really positive responses from all the people in their writing, or all the readers of their writing. That conversation, even though we don't necessarily have an answer to it, is itself really important, because now I'm asking as a reader, oh, I wonder if all these people that are commenting are in fact even real people, much less expressing their own opinion. And then Kate and I happen to have the same very strong opinion about this, and you may agree or disagree, but we have both taken the tack with our high school students. So I taught high school before I taught middle school, to be as unfiltered, I'll say, as we can, in terms of not pulling punches when the issues are tough. So in the context of something like sexting, right? I would have a conversation with high school students that was very frank. And I was of the opinion, with the obvious some lines in the sand that I'm not going to cross, but that if something was posted online and accessible to my students in the building, I could also either project it or print it out and display it. And one of the areas that this became really controversial, and I acknowledge, was when I was an advisor to the civil rights team at the high school I worked at. And we went through and pulled out hate speech from individuals in our community, and we blurred out who they were. It wasn't identifying them, but we reprinted physically and made this huge bulletin board of the hate speech terms that were being used within our town. And people were scandalized. They were like, how can you do this? And my response was, how can we not do it? How can we not take the responsibility to acknowledge this is happening among our kids, and that we need to therefore address it? And fortunately, my principal was very supportive, and I will say I did ask him in advance and had his support. And not coincidentally, he is now my superintendent, and I'm very fortunate to have him in our leadership. But he shared the opinion that it was a failing on our part to not have those conversations, whether or not they're difficult. And he was prepared to take any heat from the community that was asking why we were raising them. So I say all that because this is, to me, a great example of, this is a student writing about her own, and what a great name, Nora Laughter. Nora Laughter is writing about her experience watching her classmates, her peers, and she's, I think, writing a junior in high school, watching her peers be radicalized by really powerful messages that were full of hate speech, full of misinformation, disinformation, forwarding things that were already established to be untrue, still clinging to their seeming true to the people who were sharing them. And so what she goes on to explain is that for her, she had the distance to look at the situation and know that what was happening was problematic. But as she says really beautifully, not everyone has that skill. And the reason I have it, and she goes on to explain why that is, some great teachers she's had, her parents, but her sort of shocking realization was they weren't complicit in the process. They themselves, the people sharing the information, were totally fooled. Like there wasn't like, yeah, I know this is kind of potentially sketchy, or we don't know what all the information, but I'm going to share it anyway. They were full on, I don't know why the word hoodwinked comes to mind. I don't know if that's even applicable here, but they were hoodwinked, gosh darn it, and feeling like they had done important work in sharing this information with one another. And as she says, only because I had a little distance from it could I see not just that it was fake, but have the empathy to realize that they weren't complicit in it so much as that they themselves were just had the wool pulled over their eyes. And so that to me also, especially, and one of the things Kate and I've also found is really effective is finding student voices to speak these words, much more so. Like we can turn blue in the face giving these messages, but when you read a junior in high school saying this about her peers and about her experience, we referenced last week, Common Sense Education has some phenomenal student voiced videos on a YouTube channel, and I'll actually include that in the link to, or the information about this YouTube, about today's recording. They just do such a good job of finding real, tough, thoughtful, reflective kids who have a lot to say. And it is the difference between literally the exact same words out of their mouth and our mouths is night and day in terms of our students' engagement with it. So we would both really commend to you the idea of having any opportunities you can to bring those other student voices in. And as we were talking about this in the context of one of the schools we're working with, we also thought, what a great opportunity for an assignment and for content creation on the part of your students. So if you're finding, in this example, the Common Sense Education students talking about their perspective, their experience, if you imagine this young woman writing, doing an interview of some kind and telling you in video form about her experience, now turning the tables and say, okay, so you had that happen to you about the Ukraine news, about January 6th, about whatever, redistricting to create larger democratic districts, whatever are the questions that are being raised, putting them in the driver's seat to now be the content creators and sharing information. Kate, what was the word you used yesterday when we were talking? You said you had shifted from thinking about students being engaged.
Yes, I've shifted from engagement to empowerment. So it's right.
Can you just say a bit about why that is? Like, what was it that encouraged you to make that shift?
Yeah, I think we've heard a lot about student engagement, especially in the past couple of years as our modes of teaching maybe have shifted and changed, and we're trying new things out. And I don't really like the word student engagement because I feel like it puts the onus on the teacher to be entertaining, and takes the power away from the students really when it comes to controlling their own selves as learners, really. And so I like to think about student empowerment. So I'm always thinking about, how can I create I talked yesterday about creating cool learning opportunities for students that empowers them to make a difference, to have their voices heard, to share what they know and what they're learning. And so I am shifting from using the term student engagement to student empowerment, because again, I'm not an entertainer. I don't have any control over whether or not they're engaged, but I can help empower them by using their education.
Mm. I love that vocabulary shift. And it goes back to this question of the very first thing I asked about, like, if I say the word fake news, what does it imply? What comes behind it? And of course, Kate and I both in ELA, we think a little bit about language, but that sense of really being self-aware as a teacher about how that language impacts it. And really, I mean, even saying to your students, I am not here to entertain you, I am here to empower you. As a student, I'd be like, wow, what a cool, that's great. Thanks, Ms. Meyer. I need to be empowered. One of my absolute favorites, and I don't know that I have it super handy, but the author Bell Hooks talks about how every choice you make as an educator is itself a political act, in that everything you decide to include or exclude, every voice you have heard or don't have heard, is, whether intentionally or unintentionally, something with political ramifications. And so as I think about one of the huge issues that has made this so critical is the politicization of news, right? And the shift away from, ironically, the shift away from news as information to news as entertainment, right? So maybe we in response need to shift back from teaching as entertainment to teaching as information, teaching as neutral in that sense. And what has amplified the need for the conversation is this bifurcation and this sort of polarization that's taken place. So all the more important to find work that allows the conversation to take place in a civil way, having civil discourse about the questions that are being raised without shutting people down because of what you're talking about. So I'll begin and end with that sort of, let's say, advice. Dear friends, here's my advice, that you find areas where, and the tree octopus, I think, is a terrific example, something that is just so neutral that it allows you to start to develop the skills and then move towards the more complicated factors. It can be, and especially even when we just say hoax, a hoax used to be like, Space Invaders are, what was the thing called? The radio show that made everyone think that we were being invaded by aliens. War of the Worlds. Yeah. So War of the Worlds, which everyone believed, right? It's totally politically neutral. It was just a hoax. But now even the term hoax has a kind of political connotation. The assumption is that, COVID is a hoax. There's some kind of underlying, I guess, motivated by your politics question that is leading you to say the word hoax. So in this lesson was critical 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It is now both all the more critical in my view and all the more difficult as a result of the reasons that have made it important. So hopefully that gets you to some good places to look to kind of get yourself up to speed. And we'll return tomorrow / in 5 minutes to Kate looking at a particular lesson Common Sense Education offers around this, and some resources that we hope will help you engage students effectively in this conversation. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.